The unseen daughter, escaping the shadows of favoritism. Christmas had always been a magical time for me. Even as I grew older, I couldn't shake the excited anticipation that bloomed every December. It wasn't about the gifts. I knew I wasn't a child anymore. It was about the feeling of the season. The soft glow of the Christmas lights, the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air, and the general warmth that permeated everything, defying the cold outside. Most of all, I cherished the traditions. Each year, our family followed the same Christmas morning ritual. Waking up early, still in our pajamas, and gathering in the living room with mugs of hot chocolate. My dad would put on the same old Christmas playlist, songs I'd heard 1,000 times but that still brought a smile to my face. My mom would hand out the presents one by one, ensuring everyone had a turn while the rest of us watched. It was a small familiar tradition, something I thought we all treasured. But this year felt different. It began with subtle shifts in the weeks leading up to Christmas. My parents had been distant, barely acknowledging me unless they needed something. Our conversations felt short and forced, as if they were merely going through the motions. My younger brother, Ethan, on the other hand, received all their attention. They constantly talked to him about school, his soccer games, his friends. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that perhaps I was reading too much into it. But deep down, a gnawing feeling persisted. I just didn't expect Christmas morning to confirm my fears so starkly. I woke up that morning to the sound of Ethan's laughter drifting up from downstairs, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. For a moment I smiled, shaking off the unease in my chest and pushing aside the nagging thought that something was amiss. I made my way downstairs, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. As I stepped into the living room, the tree stood tall in the corner, glowing with soft, colorful lights. The usual pile of presents sat beneath it, perfectly wrapped with shiny bows. My mom and dad were already on the couch, sipping their coffee, and Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, his face practically glowing with excitement. "There you are," my mom said, flashing me a quick smile. "We were just about to start without you." I sat down on the floor next to Ethan, trying to suppress the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe I'm just overthinking things, I thought. Maybe this year will feel like every other. My mom reached under the tree and grabbed a gift, handing it to Ethan first, just like always. He tore into it, and I watched as he pulled out a pair of brand new sneakers, the kind he'd been talking about nonstop for weeks. His eyes lit up as he looked at our parents. "No way. These are sick." My mom laughed. "We knew you'd love them." My dad chuckled. "There's plenty more where that came from, buddy." I smiled at Ethan. "Nice," I said, trying to match his excitement. "Those are cool." He barely glanced at me before moving on to his next gift. I sat quietly as he unwrapped present after present. High-end clothes, a gaming headset, a gift card to his favorite store. With each new item, I felt my stomach tighten. Then, Mom handed him the big one. A sleek, perfectly wrapped box with a bright red bow. Ethan's eyes widened as he grabbed it, practically ripping the paper off in one motion. His jaw dropped as he held up the latest iPhone, still in its untouched packaging. "No way," he shouted. "This is insane." My mom beamed. "You've earned it," she said, ruffling his hair. My dad clapped him on the back. "You work hard, kid. You deserve it." Ethan grinned, turning the box over in his hands. "This is the best Christmas ever." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to smile. Then my mom turned to me. "Oh, almost forgot," she said, reaching under the tree. She pulled out a small lumpy package wrapped hastily in thin paper. "Here you go." I took it slowly, suddenly aware of how silent the room had become. The wrapping crinkled in my hands as I peeled it away, revealing a cheap, flimsy notebook, the kind you find at the dollar store, with a thin cardboard cover and lined pages that felt rough to the touch. I blinked. I reached inside the package again and pulled out a single plastic pen. Clicked it. Nothing. The ink was dry. For a moment I just stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then a snicker broke the silence. I looked up. Dad was smirking. Ethan burst out laughing. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "Guess someone wasn't that good this year." Mom just sipped her coffee, not saying a word. I forced a smile, gripping the notebook tightly in my hands. Thanks, I muttered. Nobody responded. In that moment, something inside me cracked. That night, long after the laughter had died down and everyone had gone to bed, I lay in my room, staring at the ceiling. The cheap notebook sat on my desk unopened. The dead pen lay beside it, useless. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to tell myself that I was overreacting. It's just a gift, I thought. It's not about the presents, it's about family. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about the gifts, it was about what they represented. Ethan had gotten everything he wanted. My mom and dad had spent months listening to him, caring about what would make him happy, making sure he felt loved and appreciated. I got a last-minute, thoughtless present, something that screamed, "We didn't even try." I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't caused problems. My grades were good. I helped around the house. I did everything they asked. And still, I was treated like an afterthought. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I had spent years pretending it didn't bother me, laughing off the favoritism, telling myself that maybe one day they'd see me, that maybe if I worked harder, did more, was better, they would finally love me the way they loved Ethan. But tonight, something in me shifted. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to care. I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could, my hands shaking. I grabbed my backpack from the corner of my room and started stuffing it with clothes. A hoodie, a couple of t-shirts, my savings, what little I had. I didn't have a real plan. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here. Not when it felt like I was invisible. Not when it hurt this much. I slipped on my shoes, took one last glance at my room, the same room I had spent my whole life in, and then I did something I never thought I would. I left. Days later, my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. I had been ignoring them for days. But then the screen lit up again. 7 missed calls. Then a text popped up. "Where are you? Please come back." My parents were panicked. But did they really care? Or were they just scared of what people would think? I took a deep breath. I had a choice to make. I stared at the phone for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. The message was clear. They were looking for me, desperate for me to come back. But why? Was it because they missed me? Or was it just because everything had gotten too complicated, and they didn't know how to fix it? I felt a wave of bitterness rise in my chest. But then another thought crept in. What if they were genuinely worried? What if they realized what they had done wrong? I turned the phone off, staring down at it for a while before putting it back in my pocket. I didn't know what to think anymore. My whole life I had tried to prove myself. I had tried to be the daughter they would finally notice, the one they would look at with pride like they did with Ethan. But all that time, all those years, I had been invisible. And now they were panicking because I was gone. But were they panicking because they realized they messed up? Or because they were losing control of their perfect image of a happy family? I didn't know, and right now I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. The next few days were the quietest I had ever known. I stayed at a friend's house, not telling anyone where I was. I spent my time thinking, maybe I was being dramatic. But the more I thought about everything, the more I realized I was tired of always being the afterthought. A few days later, I received a call. It was Mom. She sounded frantic, almost pleading. "Please come home. We've been so worried. It's not like this, we promise. We'll fix it. Just come home." I sat silently for a moment. Did I really want to go back? It took me a while, but I finally decided to pick up the phone. "I'm not coming back." There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" "You need to come home. Your father and I were sorry. We were wrong." Wrong. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. "I don't know if I can believe you," I said softly. "You've treated me like I don't matter for years. It's not just about the presents, Mom. It's about how I've been invisible all this time. I don't know if I can just forget that." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be anyone's second choice anymore. The days after that phone call felt like a blur. I spent most of my time reflecting, trying to find some sense of peace within myself. My mind kept bouncing back and forth. One minute, I felt like I was doing the right thing, standing up for myself. But the next, I felt a pang of guilt. I wasn't used to being defiant. I wasn't used to putting my foot down and demanding respect. My entire life, I had been the good daughter, the one who followed the rules and did everything expected of me. But now I was walking away from everything that had once felt familiar, and it was hard. I thought about that Christmas morning, the look on my parents' faces when they handed Ethan that shiny new phone, their pride so clear. I thought about the way I'd smiled through gritted teeth, pretending like everything was okay. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Christmas. This was about years of being overlooked. A feeling like I didn't matter, and I didn't want to go back to that. But then something happened. It was 2 weeks later when my mom showed up at my friend's house unannounced. I opened the door, startled to see her standing there looking different. She was no longer the stern, distant figure I had known all my life. Her eyes were red and her face was pale, as if she hadn't slept in days. "Can I talk to you?" she asked softly. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. But something in her voice made me hesitate. I stepped aside, letting her come in. We sat down in the living room, and for the first time in a long time, the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was raw, almost fragile. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know I can't take back what happened, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. For years, I treated you like you didn't matter, and I know that now. I see it, and I hate myself for it." I could feel my chest tighten. This wasn't the apology I expected. I didn't expect her to take full responsibility like this, to admit her mistake so openly. But there was something in her tone that made me want to believe her. "You're not invisible," she continued, her voice cracking. "I've always loved you. But I've been so caught up in making sure Ethan had everything I thought he needed. I didn't realize how much I was neglecting you. You've always been enough just the way you are. And I'm so sorry I made you feel otherwise." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to accept her apology, but another part of me felt like I needed more than just words. "I don't know if I can just come back," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's going to take time. You can't just fix this with a few sentences." She nodded, tears falling from her eyes. "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. But I don't want to lose you. Please just give me a chance." The weeks after that emotional confrontation with my mom were a mix of uncertainty and hope. Things were different now, but I wasn't about to just let my guard down completely. The pain of feeling unseen for so long didn't vanish overnight, and I couldn't just ignore the years of neglect, no matter how hard my parents tried to make things right. I spent more time with my mom and dad, but every now and then, I'd catch myself holding back just in case. I had to make sure this wasn't some temporary change, some short-lived attempt at fixing things. I didn't want to be hurt again. But then something unexpected happened. One night, a few weeks after the apology, Ethan called me. "I'm sorry," he said, sounding genuine. "I never meant to make you feel like that. I'm a jerk." And I didn't even realize what was going on until everything blew up. "I didn't think about how you felt, and for that, I'm sorry." It felt strange to hear him say that. Ethan and I had always had a sibling rivalry, but it was never this deep. We fought, sure, but it was the kind of fighting that felt normal, like any other brother and sister. But this felt different. This felt real. I wasn't sure what to say at first, but then I took a breath and replied, "Thank you. I didn't expect an apology from you, but it means a lot." He sounded relieved. "I really do hope we can get along better. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." Over the next few months, I watched my family slowly begin to change. I won't say everything was perfect overnight because it wasn't. There were still awkward moments. Still moments where I questioned if they really meant what they said. But gradually, the distance between us shrank. My parents started taking the time to ask me about my day, to check in on me without it feeling like a duty. And the best part, they stopped comparing me to Ethan. I noticed it the most when I got a new job offer. Instead of the usual, "Well, Ethan did this," or "Ethan got that," I heard, "We're so proud of you." As the months went on, things with my family began to settle. The apologies didn't feel as hollow anymore, and I could tell that my parents were genuinely trying to make things right. They were putting in effort, asking about my life and listening when I spoke. It wasn't perfect, And there were moments where I still felt a flicker of that old resentment. But things were better, and I could tell they were trying. Ethan too. Our relationship slowly improved. We had our awkward moments, but every conversation felt like a step forward. Sometimes we would joke around like we used to, or talk about things we never had the chance to discuss before. And while I still wasn't ready to completely forget the past, I couldn't deny that I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, things could go back to some version of normal. I never expected that apology from Ethan, and I still don't think he fully understood the depth of how much his actions had hurt me. But the fact that he made an effort, that he acknowledged what had happened, it meant something. The biggest change, though, came from my parents. They took responsibility, which was huge. For years, I had felt like I was invisible, like I didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And that Christmas morning was the tipping point. But in the months that followed, I saw them put their words into action. They didn't just apologize, they made sure I knew that I was valued. They made it clear that I was not second place, not an afterthought. It wasn't about the presents anymore, it was about the time, the attention, and the care. I started to see my parents as people, not just as figures in my life who only cared about their idea of a perfect family. But even with all of that, I realized something important. I had learned to stand up for myself. I had learned that it was okay to walk away when I needed to, and it was okay to demand more. For years I had been silent, playing the role of the invisible child. But walking away made me realize I had a voice. I had a right to be heard. And maybe that was the most important lesson of all. So looking back, was it the right decision to leave? Was it the right decision to stand up for myself and demand respect, even if it meant hurting my family in the process? In the end, I think I did what I needed to do. It pushed my family to change, and it pushed me to find strength I didn't know I had. Honestly, I think OP made the right call. It's tough to walk away from family, but sometimes it's the only way to get people to understand how much their actions have hurt you. What do you all think? Was OP right to leave? Or should they have stayed and tried to work things out quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you think OP handled it well, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.